and welcome to a slightly delayed full Scottish today. Apologies for that. We've had a few technical issues, but we thank you very much for your patience and hope you've stayed with us. I'm Michelle Rodger.
And I'm Richard Walker. We've got a cracking show lined up for you today with guests ranging from singers and comedians to writers and actors. With us today to review the Sunday papers are Elaine Livingstone and Lynn McAdam. Elaine is a former picture editor with the Sunday Herald and has carried out a range of freelance projects from Brooklyn to the Congo. She's just started an online project, Glasgow Lives, which is proving a huge hit. And Lynn is head of communications with the Prince and Princess of Wales hospice in Glasgow and is a successful PR executive.
Foreign journalist David Pratt returns to the Full Scottish this week. He'll be talking about Boko Haram and the second anniversary of the kidnapping of more than 200 schoolgirls. The social media outcry at the time, I'm sure you remember the hashtag #BringBackOurGirls. Well, that's faded and the rest of the world has moved on, yet hundreds of families are still waiting for their daughters to be returned. Just a couple of days ago, CNN broadcast a video showing 15 of the missing girls, prompting anger and questions as to why the Nigerian government, believed to have been in possession of this video since mid-January, had failed to inform the families of the girls that it had the film and had actually still failed to negotiate their release. It's a tragic and emotive story, and it's one that David has followed since the girls were captured.
Writer and musician Pat Kane is here to talk about education, the need for an alternative media, and he'll also reveal why he has left the Green Party. Kathleen Caskey of Women for Independence will be sharing the outcome of an extensive listening exercise carried out across WFI branches throughout Scotland. It's not exactly a manifesto, but it does show women's thoughts, hopes and wishes for Scotland and the Scottish Parliament, from fracking to mental health, independence to education, and ending poverty to land reform. Some of the issues raised are bound to raise a few eyebrows.
Kristina Woolnough will be here talking to the Full Scottish about the effects of the PPP debacle in Edinburgh on pupils and families. A journalist and former Edinburgh representative on the National Parent Forum, her son attends one of the schools that has been affected. I'm sure you'll remember 17 schools in Edinburgh were closed amid safety fears, and Edinburgh Council was actually forced to cancel students' practical exams. About 7,600 pupils missed the first 2 days of the new term following the Easter break. And while most are now back in alternative classrooms, the remaining primary and special school pupils will have to wait until Tuesday.
And we'll also be featuring singer-songwriter Megan Airlie, who'll be performing for you, and Scottish comedian Viv Gee, who'll be taking an irreverent look at the week in politics.
So let's finally kick off the Full Scottish and welcome Elaine and Lynn to the show for our Sunday paper review.
Morning.
Morning, how you doing?
Afternoon.
So we're kicking off today's paper review with the Old Firm match, which is ongoing at the moment. And the story that Old Firm games tend to have an impact on victims of domestic abuse. And what's happened since Friday is that officers have been rounding up and detaining known domestic abusers in a bid to protect their families. But Scottish Women's Aid, Dr. Marcia Scott, has said that this does women no favours when it comes to that. She says that to blame football and alcohol for domestic abuse is to not pay attention to the real reason behind domestic abuse, which is the behaviour of the men involved.
Yep. I mean, I think sort of the situation, it's trying to minimise probably the impact rather than sort of actually kind of treat the core. But I feel a bit uncomfortable about it as well. It feels a bit like trying to stick elastoplast onto sort of like kind of a hemorrhage for me, really. There's a lot more to be addressed there in order to try and resolve a situation like that.
Sure.
I mean, I suppose arguably it does protect vulnerable women, vulnerable families in these instances, but I think you're right, it's missing a wider issue. It's not enough, as you say, to stick that sticking plaster over, certain periods or around certain events. It's, we have to, as Michelle says as well, it's not just about football, it's not just about Old Firm, it's not just about, it's domestic violence is an issue, and people who abuse their partners are abusers, not only the weekend the football's on.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's not about football, but there is a link being established between the Old Firm matches and
Absolutely.
incidents of domestic abuse. So I guess it's quite a good thing for police to take some steps to try and minimise the impact of that on victims. So I think it's better to do that than nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
Even
Still,
if it's
yeah.
not the whole solution to clearly it's not the whole solution to the problem, but it's,
Yeah.
it's something.
Yep, damage limitation,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
One of the other subjects that are all over the papers today is the PPP and the schools in Edinburgh that have closed, 17 of them, and the problems that have arisen since then. I think Sunday Herald has a thing about it's costing 30 billion. Scotland Sunday has something that suggests that they'll be paid 100 million too much for the schools. Well, you saw the Sunday Herald, the Scotland Sunday one, and you thought it was a bit...
Yeah, it's a wee bit misleading because I'm sure they're not meant to frame it this way, but I think the stand first says Edinburgh buildings closed by structural failures could have been constructed for less, which kind of implies that would have been fine for them to be flawed if they hadn't been 100 million over budget, and I'm sure that's not what they meant, but so to add insult to injury, not only the flawed, they're flawed 100 million more pounds than you should have been. So.
The Sunday Herald, I think, answered some of the calls for, I guess, from pro-independence people who have been, I think, frustrated at the lack of blame being attached to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party for this fiasco, because the Conservative Party introduced PFI, the Labour Party then took that and extended it, and I guess there is a view that that extension of it and that concentration on it is at the heart of this problem, and it's chickens coming home to roost.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you think that that's
I think probably sort of, if you look at it down to sort of almost like a local authority level, then I think they're under a lot of pressure to renew old school stocks and a lot of buildings that have actually got past fit for purpose. I think sort of like long term, the financial impact has probably not been thought through in terms of the long term, very high cost maintenance projects. But it's been a quick fix. And for councillors on like a kind of a 4-year sort of like kind of getting voted, you can understand the pressure. They think, right, okay, let's just go for it and we'll get new schools in. So I think it's that long, like short term success without thinking about the kind of long term sustainability.
We'll be talking about some of the effects of it later on, but I guess, if I'm going to buy a house, then I'm not going to have the wherewithal to do that straight away.
Yep.
Particularly if I live in London, I'll probably never have the wherewithal to do it. But I would need to go get a mortgage.
Yep.
And therefore, I guess this is similar to that. You go get a mortgage.
Yep.
So, what's the problem with that?
I think it's the long-term kind of maintenance contracts, Richard. I think the idea, they take initial glory of sort of like kind of being able to put up sort of like kind of new education facilities when you've got ones that are kind of collapsing round about you. I think it's sort of like they don't look at all the detail in the long-term plan and what the long-term finances are going to be, and also the interest and the loans that they borrow as well.
Okay.
I think it's a tricky, a hideous situation, yeah.
It is, and we'll be talking about it later on. However, we've also seen an Indian Night column, I think.
Yes, absolutely. This really kind of quite tickled me.
Yeah. This is your thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think I'm kind of getting to a lady of a kind of certain age where I'm dressing for comfort as opposed to sort of fashion. No, let it be said. This really quite tickled me. I'm a wee bit of an Indian Night fan. She did a brilliant book called My Life in a Plate, which I thought was very, very funny, and it's all around weight loss issues, etc. She's very kind of tongue-in-cheek, but this tickled me rotten. So she's basically saying that sort of like she's now, because she's been out spending a bit of time in the country, she is freeing herself of the tyranny of the fashion world, and I'm finally breaking free, she says here. And I did think it was funny. So she's basically got used to kicking about in the country sort of with wellies and jeans and sort of like wax barber jackets, etc., sort of like perfectly acceptable. Gets back into London, get into the new season, and everybody's chat is about like, oh, what you're buying from who, you're renewing, and she's got into her wardrobe and thought, I actually don't need any clothes, I've got thousands of clothes, this is ridiculous. So ends up in a telephone call with a friend of hers who is sort of like kind of works in kind of the fashion industry sort of at a very high level, and they're organising to go to some do, and she's like, well, what are you wearing? And she sent her a photograph. Do you remember the old characters from French and Saunders did of the two old sort of like ladies in the country with the wellies, they're chopping their fingers off and stuff like that and feeding them to the dog? Absolutely hilarious. And she said her pal went ha 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 ha, and she was like, no, I'm serious. I'm coming dressed like that. So that did quite tickle me, I have to say.
Some of us have already freed ourselves from the tyranny. Some of us did so quite some time ago. I tell you, as a guy, I always have I never know how acceptable it is to talk about what women are wearing. I mean, it seems rude not to, given we've obviously spent some time deciding what to wear, and then if you do, particularly with female politicians, then you're accused of being a sexist idiot. And why are you talking about my shoes? When is it okay? Please tell me.
I think it's as long as you're saying something positive, and it's not becoming sort of like a style over content. So I think it's nice to kind of go, the Sturges get a nice, Nicola, the First Minister, has got a nice pair of tartan shoes on, but actually not bypass that. It's not the main part of your kind of focus, and it's actually about what she was saying, and that's a sort of like an aside.
I remember still doing Everage interviewing David Steele and his wife, and she turned to Julie Steele and said, why are you wearing a curtain? Really, I would never do that. But Nicola Sturgeon, I remember, wore a rather fetching pair of tartan shoes.
That's right,
and some papers, including the Sunday Herald, did a picture of that, and we were very strongly criticised because, why are you focusing on what she's wearing, what shoes she's wearing?
Yep.
But, there were, some ties that guys might wear that we would do the same if they were, the type of ties I'm talking about, Simpson ties, stuff like that, didn't look good. We would definitely have mentioned that.
Yeah, that would deserve a good slagging, I think.
Not that these shoes were the equivalent of a Simpson tie. I'm not suggesting that.
I know. I think just keep it positive. I think if you're going to make a comment, tell somebody they look good.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, it's the legacy of women being criticised for how they look, what they wear, that being the forefront of, the analysis of a woman before, the more kind of...
It's a great jacket, by the way.
Thank you very much.
You can say that to me too. Sunday Times Elaine.
Yes.
Right, this is pictures of William and Kate and Diana. Contrasting pictures at Taj Mahal. You're not really a fan of the way they've done this?
Well, I think the point is, and I think it's just popped down there under the SOS.
Telegraph.
Yeah, just the Telegraph page. So the point, in William's words, the royal visit to India with wife Kate creating new memories, and they've obviously, tried to kind of emulate the famous picture of Diana in front of the symbol of love, the Taj Mahal, where she was, it was an emphasis on her loneliness in love. This is a reinforcement of their togetherness in love, and I think the sort of point is it's the symbol of love, the Taj Mahal, is included in the shot for context as well as comparison to Diana's shot, and the Sunday Times seem to just crop that out and done the same with the famous Diana shot. I can see why they've done it as a, if they're using the picture of that size to have impact on the front page.
It's as if the important thing is the bench.
The bench has become the kind of focus of the... but I think the Telegraph, to be honest, have kind of nailed it. They've got the point of it, and
and that is a beautiful photograph.
Even with the scaffolding.
The one of Diana, or always happens in the holiday snaps, the one of Diana inside.
We were talking about the scaffolding at the side of it. Is it? Could they not have photoshopped that?
They could have, but that would just be wrong.
Oh, right. That's what I would have done. Okay, sorry.
Where's your integrity?
Journalistic integrity.
Exactly.
Indeed. And there was another story in, I think, sometimes about an SNP proposal to introduce for women who take time off to have children when they come back to work, a period of time where they are reintroduced to the working community, and also to make sure that they don't lose any status they have or any promoted posts they have, which seems to me pretty fair. But then, does that give problems to businesses, or does that matter?
I don't know, I think it's the right thing to do, but for very small businesses, the impact of any member of staff taking a long period of it out and then coming back in, there's a big cost implication. You have to replace that person while they're away, and then you have to pay to retrain them or train up in many cases. We used to have an IT business, and if one of our members of staff had been out for 6 or 9 months, the pace of the change in technology is such that they couldn't come back in and do the same job that they were doing before without training. So yes, I absolutely agree. Anybody having to take time out, male or female, to look after their children, yes, they should be able to come back in at the same level. But there should be some form of support, I think, to help very small businesses cope with the financial impact of that.
Absolutely. You can't sort of say these things have to be implemented and not support them, and it's a societal thing as well. There are certain roles in society that are still very male driven, male dominated, and we all want women to take on these roles, but they don't make the roles family friendly. And I'm not saying that's an easy task, but things really, it has to be changed at a kind of grassroots level up, and support has to be given, across the board.
Yeah. I think the key thing is it's actually about providing women with options. So it's entirely up to them, sort of at choice-wise, as opposed to pressure to kind of go back. But I think sort of like, I guess really, is there any finance to kind of back that up in terms of support for the businesses to lessen the impact on them?
No.
Okay, yeah, tricky.
Although, I mean, I think it's completely unreasonable that women who decide to leave work to have a child, then they come back and they find out that the job they had is now been given to somebody, presumably a guy, and they're going to have to take a position at a lower level. That seems to be nuts. If that happened to men, we'd be having a population crisis because there would be no babies being born, because we're not going to do that.
Well, that's a very good point. I think we say we want a career, industry, everything to support the family, to support family life, family, but it is too much lip service. There has to be those mechanisms in place to do that.
Yep.
Absolutely. So we're also now going to move on to talk about some of the international stories that are in the papers today and are prominent among us at the top of the agenda just now. And we'll welcome on stage David Pratt, former foreign editor at Sunday Herald and contributing foreign editor.
Good afternoon.
David, how are you doing? So kick it off. We'll talk about maybe the Congo, because
Elaine's just been there.
You were there for a photographic project?
Yeah, I mean, I was, strangely enough, I was working on a very positive story about a kind of women's cooperative who, through agriculture, are trying to achieve self-sustainability to support them, their families, helping themselves out of poverty. And the Congo's an extraordinary place. It's a stunning place. The people are beautiful. It should be one of the richest countries in the world. It's rich in natural resources, but it's just been brutalised by conflict, corruption, political instability, and it's that just horrible irony that it should be the food basket of Africa and beyond, and really kind of heartbreaking what's going on out there. But people who are really trying to fight against that and lift themselves out of that. But David knows Africa well.
You've been to the Congo.
Yeah, I've been in the Congo a lot. As Elaine says, I mean, it's a huge place. Everything's bigger in the Congo. It's a physically massive place. Even the creepy crawlies are bigger than you'll get in most parts of Africa. It's a scary place in many respects, but it has been bedeviled by conflict going back decades now. Part of the reason, of course, is because it is very rich, potentially very rich, particularly in the east of the country, North Kivu province, where there's all kinds of mineral deposits, gold or whatever, and it's become a kind of playground for many of the neighbouring countries in that way. But it's a phenomenal place. But as Elaine said, it's great to be able to go to Africa and produce positive stories, because there's so much negativity about Africa in that sense. And I think that the story on Boko Haram is a reminder of how much negative coverage, of course, comes out from that part of the world, but there's no avoiding it in the case of Nigeria.
I mean, we touched on Boko Haram last week, and then the video came out between then and now. I guess I would have expected maybe that to have a bit more impact.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is that the video's out and you already see it beginning to slide off the headlines again. We've had that intervening period, about 2 years ago, when it was a huge social media campaign to bring back our girls. It drifted away after Michelle Obama and various celebrities, sort of got involved. And then suddenly it's back again. I think it's interesting that Boko Haram themselves are very kind of propaganda astute. Just like their counterparts in the Middle East with the Islamic State group, and they knew about the timing. They knew that they would grab international attention. So the video was released to coincide with that. So once again, they've wrong-footed, I think, the kind of West and the Nigerian government. They're one step ahead in terms of the propaganda value they've got from it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw there was a story. I think it was a Telegraph about women being recruited to IS and to carry out various acts of terrorism, and is this a growing problem?
Well, I mean, one of the things about Boko Haram is that, and I've been writing about this over the last few weeks, and both in Herald and Sunday Herald and various papers, but the issue here is that women are bearing the brunt of Boko Haram violence. The recent statistics showing that something like 3/4 now of suicide bombers are female children that have been indoctrinated, have been press gangs into Boko Haram itself. It's the scale of the problem that strikes me. One of the things that really got to me when I was there was the fact that you've got 2.2 million people displaced. It's one of the biggest humanitarian crises in the world. It's up there with Syria, it's up there with Yemen, but it doesn't get the attention that it should, partly because it's in Africa.
Yep.
We don't have obvious vested interests in that region, so it doesn't make the headlines. And frankly, another reason is because, at a slightly more kind of sinister level, I think the Nigerian government are keen to keep it out of the headlines. They're terrified that foreign investors won't invest in the country. Nigeria is an oil-rich country, it needs foreign investment too. And they want to present this notion that somehow they've got it under control and they can handle it. And far from it. The displaced numbers are increasing every day, and more girls and women are being press-ganged into the ranks of Boko Haram.
I guess the other big international story today is the earthquake in Ecuador, and then which follows on to the ones in Japan earlier on this week. It's just a terrible tragedy.
Yeah, they're not. I think it's an interesting insight into the way news agendas operate here. The sheer numbers often dictate the headlines. There's not, fortunately, been thus far too many people killed. Still too many, but 70 odd here, Ecuador, Tonga. And obviously in Japan, unless it's in the thousands or the hundreds, then it doesn't get the attention that it deserves.
It's always interesting to see when these national disasters kind of become major drives to raise money, and really successful drives to make money. I remember there was a huge earthquake in Pakistan. The Sunday Herald raised a lot of money for it. I managed to go out and see the aftermath of that and how that country was recovering from that, which was an incredible experience for me to see that. But then there was the tsunami, which became a huge thing to raise money for. But something you have to sit and wait and see when that becomes one of those
There's a numbers
trends.
game, Richard, and there's also another factor, I think, related to major humanitarian crisis, and it takes us back to the thing in Nigeria itself. It's whether that humanitarian crisis is a result of a God-given act, it's a natural disaster, it's perceived that way, or whether it's perceived as a man-made conflict. It's very interesting, and I know this from our own years of experience in newspapers. The way people respond to humanitarian crisis in terms of providing donations or support is very much determined by those factors. If it's perceived to be man-made and that therefore they could sort it out themselves, people are slightly more reluctant to put their hands in their pocket to pay much attention to it. If it's an earthquake in Haiti or in Pakistan, where no one is responsible, it's an act of God, it's an act of nature, then people tend to respond much more favourably. And that seems to determine how it's then placed within the news agenda itself.
Because I remember we did quite a lot of work on child soldiers in Liberia, and that was actually really difficult to get people's attention and to get people's sympathy. I don't know why, but it was hard.
Exactly. If you think of these girls that are now being used as suicide bombers in Nigeria, they're as much victims as the people that they're blowing up. They've been kidnapped, they've been abducted, they've been indoctrinated, in some cases drugged, and pushed into this activity, and they are victims, and they're very much in need of support should they be freed and released by the humanitarian sort of sector itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we say goodbye to Elaine and Lynn, if we could just have a quick chat about Glasgow Lives, which is your project. What's the kind of idea behind that?
So it's for a new website launching tomorrow, Glasgow Live. It's a
GlasgowLive.co.uk.
GlasgowLive.co.uk. The portraits have been running for about 4 weeks. It's a Monday to Friday. We do a daily portrait and just a little sort of daily slice of people's lives, little vignette of their life. People can talk about whatever they like, and it's been really, really successful.
The most popular one?
Marie Claire, who I've sort of now think of as the Glasgow guru.
I know, she seemed to have a philosophy for life that has really hit a nerve. Because her idea was what?
Just don't live to work, work to live.
I'm definitely up for that.
Life can be hard, life can be tough, so just make sure you stop and appreciate the the finer things, the good points in life, and you don't define yourself just by what you do for a living. Define yourself by everything else. So that seems to have really hit absolutely.
Yeah. What about you, Lynn? Is that something you?
I know it's funny. It's something I'd like to be much more balanced about that. I have to say, actually, my work-life balance is way out of whack. It's unbelievable. I mean, I don't know.
Not enough work.
No, it's far too much work. But I'm grateful for that as well. But actually, no, Marie Claire's definitely touched a bit of a zeitgeist. Not define yourself by your job. And actually, there's a really beautiful thing that she kind of says towards the end of sort of like kind of her words, which was, life actually kind of is sometimes can be a really hard thing, but you have moments where you think, oh my God, this is absolutely so beautiful. And I think it's that's really touched people as well.
Finding those moments.
Absolutely.
This is one of those moments, right?
This is a moment. So Elaine, Lynn, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope to see you back in the Full Scottish again soon. David, I think you're going to stay with us while we speak to Pat Kane. Pat, welcome.
Coming.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I feel this is like a Sunday Herald commune.
It's like a Sunday Herald conference. Or shorter.
Yeah, sure.
I actually was opposite. I think sometimes it reminds me of one of these scenes from a sort of Basque propaganda film. We should all be wearing masks or something.
It's true. I think there's an app that can make the screen crackly. So if you could do that, that would be absolutely great.
That would be very nice. So, Pat, you have, I believe, left the Green Party, which you joined.
Oh, your journalistic nose twitches at the merest sniff of a controversy.
There's no beating about
Yes,
the bush.
yes, I contain multitudes, but you left the Green Party.
You left,
Wow.
yeah, totally. So, what's the scope?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, like everybody else, like lots of people, I joined a party after the 18th of September 2014, and I decided to join the Green Party because I thought that's, in any case, it has to be a party that supports independence. But I think green politics is a politics of the future in terms of all the long-term drivers, whether it's technology or whether it's energy or whether it's demographics or obviously in terms of climate change, earthquakes that might be happening because the ice flow is melting and the permafrost is getting more unstable. But that was my design. I thought I'll try on the party robes. There's 3 parties I've joined in my life. One was the SNP in the early 90s. The second one was Labour for Independence. I don't think you can count that for a party during the run-up to the referendum. And again, it's like putting on your lovely jacket. I try it on and see what it feels like. And it feels like a jaggy jumper. It feels like and it felt like narrowing down my opportunities to be able to talk about the opportunities for independence or where we go with more powers for Scotland. And I think I'm not enjoying the current moment of party politics on the way up to the referendum. Yeah. I mean, I have often defined myself as a yeser because, like many people, the experience of the run up to the yes and the after was an amazing experience, kind of a world-class experience of being in a movement aiming towards an ideal and where plurality and diversity was kind of welcomed if you're heading for independence. And I'm not enjoying the party political ding-dong at the moment. So I left the Green Party. I left the Green Party because I didn't want to be partisan vis-a-vis my compatriots and comrades in all the parties that support independence, whether that's the SNP, the Greens, or Rise, or rogue Labour people or rogue Lib Dem people. It doesn't feel right. And I understand why parties have to do that. They're in a contest. Everybody has to accentuate their points and also accentuate everybody else's demerits. But it made me realise how shaping the experience of the referendum was and the movement element of it was. And I'm going to stick close to that rather than for the foreseeable future, whether as an activist or as a writer, rather than align myself with any particular independence party.
I think it's a really good point, but I think it's very worrying. I was talking to some friends the other night. It's a conversation that we've had many times before, about party political partisanship, if you like, and how, in a way, it can actually be erosive for the independence movement itself. I mean, certainly most of the people I was talking to that night round the table, there was maybe one that was in a political party, was a sort of card-carrying member of that party. Everyone around the table virtually were yesers, were pro-independence, but were incredibly, shall we say, apprehensive, if not downright sceptical, of party political politics, and felt that it could actually erode the wider kind of independence movement in that way. And I think it's a commonly held view.
No one party has a monopoly of wisdom in this.
No.
And I sat around the Yes Scotland board with Patrick Harvey there from the Green Party and with Colin Fox from the SSP there and a landowner there and a rogue missile, as we all know, Elaine Smith to be over there. And the discussion, as the white paper developed, was, one, let's make sure that it doesn't become an SNP party document. Let's leave room for the idea that things could be different after. But let's also be straight, is that because it emerged from within the SNP cocoon in their discussions with the civil service, Indie Light wasn't enough. It wasn't effective. Nobody actually believed the currency option. And nobody believed that it would be a kind of Jedi hand wave. All these problems, it'll be all right, don't worry, it'll be okay on the day, it'll be fine. It didn't work. Indie Light didn't work, and it didn't work because it was too insular, and the process that forced it was too insular. Now, there's ways that we can address that going forward. But one of the ways is I'm so desperate to get beyond May the 5th, so that we can get down to the discussion about what is required, how do you upgrade the offer for independence. And I think Greens and Socialists and the Left Greens and Liberal Democrats and even pro-enterprise people have a voice to play in forging the next independence offer, because the last one wasn't good enough.
So how does that play with the both votes this party, both votes that party? How does that play out?
I'm very personal about this. Every vote I've ever given in the Scottish Parliament has been a both votes yes. If I've had a chance, and I think a lot of people, in a commonsensical way, they don't understand the D'Hondt calculations that divide apportion votes. And the way that you can game it or strategise it is incredibly complex, and it's actually beyond me. And I think I'm quite smart on this.
The papers today. John Curtis today, isn't it?
Well,
it's not a reflection by the great number cruncher that he is. That's very different from what he was saying 2 or 3 weeks ago.
There's a number of
issues. Constantly changing.
There's a number of issues around about the election, but I guess we're in an election.
Yes, I know. That's what I'm saying.
So
let's not be too harsh on the fact that people are in an agonistic contested situation, because that's what it is.
I think the problem for me as a yes voter for the election is I want to have a party, a Scottish Parliament, which is diverse as it can be within a kind of yes umbrella. But I have absolutely no idea how to achieve that.
Yeah.
Because if I don't vote both votes SNP, is that going to allow somebody who is a representative of a pro-union party in
that's the suggestion, isn't it? The union's in the back door.
And John Curtis, as far as I understood him to be arguing a couple of weeks ago, was saying exactly that. But in the Sunday Herald today, he's saying exactly not that. Vote Rise, vote Green if you want to achieve.
As a matter of principle, I've always given the list vote, second vote, to someone. I voted SNP all the way through on the first vote. But I call it first vote and second vote because it's supposed to be proportional. Now, if it isn't properly proportional, the mechanism isn't properly proportional, we need to fix it and make it more proportional. But that's the principle. The principle is the idea that at last I have a sophisticated electoral process whereby my sophistication as a Democrat who can see the value of a diversity in a polity says, okay, there's the party that's going to take us to independence, and there's the party that's going to ask questions about, say, for example, carbon, the role of carbon in economic life. Who's going to ask questions about feminism or gender? Who's going to ask questions about how are we actually dealing with poverty in a way that's totally focused? That has to be a strength.
So
and the idea.
Are we now clear as to how we will use these two votes?
I'm clear.
Every time I think I have it in my head how this system works, it just goes again.
I think you should vote with your heart. Vote with what feels right to you, whether it is splitting the vote or whether it's wholeheartedly with one party.
It's about
the very fact that there seems to be contradictions within the number crunching, which you've mentioned, makes me also. It's not just baffling; it makes me a little bit wary, I therefore, take the position that perhaps I should just use those two votes for the one party, and let's not tinker with the mechanisms here because there seems so many imponderables to this.
But it's all. I guess don't want to rehash some of the arguments about the media and the referendums. But I know you're thinking very deeply about what kind of media we need to have in Scotland at this point.
Well, it's not need to have, we've got it.
Right.
So here we are, number one. I began to do a list of the various audiovisual initiatives people putting into Independence Live. There's various other people. We're doing pirate TV already. The blogosphere is incredibly rich. If people feel that they want to set up what you would call a public space or an editorial process, they get their pals together and they do it. So to actually chart that is to get into the scores and scores and scores, maybe even 3 figures. So we've already got a media that is connected to a movement and is diverse. And is diverse, something like the Scottish Review, for example, or Sceptical Scott,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, or the new opinion slot on STV. These are all responses to the fact that the Yes movement had to not just bemoan the media, but become the media. So we're actually enriched. The ecosystem is quite rich. Money's the deal. You know,
money's the deal.
Money's the deal.
Media equally.
In any
because
case,
nobody knows really how to monetize the internet. Still,
nobody knows anything. So the old is dying and the new is yet to be born, as the old lefties say. But in the interregnum, in the middle, it's people are trying to do stuff, and that level of small I independence and small A autonomy is what drives everything about Scotland going forward. And if people don't make things happen with these tools that are available, and just keep doing it, activism and activity is incredibly
I love the idea
important,
of these guerrilla tools, if I can use that expression. In terms of indeed the full Scottish to some extent is a perfect example of that. And I think it's also equally important. There's no navel gazing here, because one of my criticisms of a lot of mainstream media, and given from the kind of area that I work in, is that Scotland is Scotland, but it has an internationalist outlook here, and I really feel that a lot of mainstream media, and I work within that too, we've all worked within that, that incredibly it's becoming more and more parochial. That there's not the resources, there's not the funding there for the kinds of international coverage. That doesn't mean you say it still can't be done. And I'm really passionate, and always have been very passionate about international coverage, and I feel that the guerrilla platform allows you to do that. And if you look at some big media organisations like Vice News and things that have emerged, very small seeds to begin with, but have become very, very proficient at covering big stories internationally.
Can we move on?
Sure, whatever.
Just very briefly, I know you're giving a speech on Monday.
I'm doing a lecture on next Saturday for the Saltire Society's 80th anniversary on education. Right, that's the subject that they chucked at me. Yeah. So I did a speech when I was rector in 1990, which I'm going to look back at again and basically compare the then and now. I mean, basically everything. I think, and the basic thing in the speech, which was riffing off Jimmy Reid's famous rectorial speech, was to do with the coming technologies. And I think I had a room full of equipment that was actually equivalent to this. That was going to take forward technology and mass education and mass enlightenment. So I'm going to be sort of comparing 1990 to 2016. And that's quite an interesting exercise, to look over that sort of 20, 30 years, is to see a completely different relationship between people and the media. And it's a real moment for activity and enterprise. But someone was talking about work-life balance, and I think one of the things that will emerge from the politics that we've got in Scotland, and I think the ScotGov actually listened to this, is how do you use regulation to give people more time in their lives to be citizens? Because clearly that's where the energy in Scotland is. As Jimmy Reid would say, the untapped energy of the people is bigger than any oil field. But the question for this government going forward, if it's settling in for the next 5 years, is how do we help Civic Scotland, radical Civic Scotland, be the energy there is, and be a way for them to be a radar system and say, well, what are we not doing and what are we not listening? And if that's the situation, I know these people, I've known them for about 30 years. I'm not going to say trust, I'm not in a trust Nicola mode, but I think they know that there's a dynamic required between a movement and a party, and we've got to keep it up.
Yeah. Good. We need to move on at this stage. David, thanks very much for joining us again. Hope to see you sometime.
I thought you would be ejecting me after all that, rather than this urbane, worldly man over here. But anyway,
you need to stay here.
All right, I'll stay.
We're going to listen to fantastic singer-songwriter Megan Airlie.
Move on. Oh, careful, Megan.
What are you going to be singing for us, Megan?
I'm going to be singing my own song called Elements.
Go for it.
Go for it, Megan.
My
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. We'll see you later on. We'd now like to welcome to the full Scottish Kathleen Caskey of Women for Independence. Kathleen. Hello. I've read Women for India's listening exercise, and what strikes me about it, the theme coming through all the issues that have been discussed, is this desire for radical change, not just minor tweaks and little bits here and there, but real radical change, doing things differently in Scotland.
Definitely a different kind of politics. It's quite interesting. Pat was talking about the general election, the stage we're at politically, the sort of partisanship of it. And I look at the papers and it says, the election is about tax. It's about tax. Or they say, and here is the photo call. Here's Willie Rennie up a slide. Here's Kes. You know, in reality, when we talked to women and when we listened to women, they weren't saying, it's about this. It's an election. It's a point in history and there's one issue. What women started to talk about was, how do we change the way the world works? How do we build it from the bottom up? An election isn't about the issue that some, usually young white male journalist has plucked out there and said, this is what the election's about. So I think when you're talking about doing politics differently, it is about moving away from that idea of an election being about an issue or about a photo, and talking about how can we radically change Scotland really differently from the bottom up. Now, what was really interesting in the listening exercise, we talked to hundreds of women across Scotland, but more importantly, we listened to them than we talked to them, and then we pulled together all the different reports we got back, and the similarities were incredible. But what was really interesting was nobody said, I want a richer Scotland. Nobody said, I want a stronger Scotland in terms of defence. What they said was, I want a different Scotland, a very different Scotland. And so there's this huge gap between the election as it plays out in the media and it plays out in the TV and what people actually hope for in their lives, because there's nobody going out there going, what I hope for is a penny off or a penny on my tax, and that's what, that depth, that nuance, I just think the normal political ways of doing things isn't picking up on that kind of revolutionary undercurrent at all.
I think the STUC today is, I guess, berating the political parties in Scotland for the campaign so far because of a lack of ambition. And it says there's no radical ideas, there's nothing coming forward, even to use the new powers that Scotland's getting. There's just a dearth of ideas, whereas, I guess in the referendum campaign there was just this, everybody was talking about all the different things that we could do and recreating Scotland. I suppose is that not an inevitable consequence of party politics as usual?
Yes, and I think what was quite interesting came out from the listening exercise was people started to talk about how they wanted health, they wanted delivery of services, and they said, but this is going to take more than an election cycle. This is a 15-year, this is a 20-year project. So we actually need all the parties to kind of share to some extent the vision of where Scotland wants to go and move beyond the partisan, because we are trapped into these elections. I think you're going to talk about that in terms of PFI, or someone mentioned that earlier in the schools. This kind of, will do us till the next election. Yeah. What can we get? That isn't how we need, and really, taking away the Constitution, which may be sacrilege in this circle, but if we forget about independence for a moment, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, the Greens, Rise, I'm going to leave the Tories out, but those parties could probably reach some kind of consensus on a radical vision for Scotland. And that dialogue, that working together, that pluralism really can't happen with politics as usual,
What would be the elements of some sort of radical approach? I know one of the things is food, which you regard, or at least women who have been talked to or have talked to you in this thing, say food is a big thing.
Oh, food's a very political issue. There's stuff about the transport of food and the way that supermarkets sell food that they've transported a long way, which is an impact on the environment. There's all the health issues. There's the question of land, and what was really interesting was Women for Independence said radical land reform. We want leadership on this, but not just who owns the land and how the land is taxed, but how the land is used. And it's a vision of people, and it might sound a bit kind of hippie, but in fact people growing their own vegetables, And there's so many small third sector projects across Scotland now that are doing that and taking children in. They grow the vegetables, they learn to cook, they learn what vegetables look like before they're diced up and sliced and sold through Iceland in the, I mentioned a company, through the freezer, leading freezer chain, in wee chopped up bags. So that getting people to understand that food comes from the land. And there's a real radical ideas about that. And food is an issue for all of us, but women particularly are tapped into this idea of food for health, food for land use, food for prosperity. Food is a way to tackle poverty because, food banks are where you get your food, but what you get in a food, if you're poor, but what you get in your food bank is dried food, is processed food, is food that lasts. How much better if we had the energy and the resources to put into helping people to, grow their own vegetables, grow their own fruit. And indeed in one project in the south side of Glasgow, which is around that, they actually have their own animals too. That's quite challenging for city people because they suddenly realise that the bacons come from the thing with the face, which is a bit of, but that should be.
A friend of the Tory governments everywhere, yes.
No, but why is that? That is a political issue. I mean, food is a political issue, and we can't, we shouldn't just focus on what the media attacks as a political issue. The waiting time at A&E is a political issue. Well, it's not. It's a statistic. It tells us nothing about the health of a nation. It tells us just how long they had to wait at A&E. So there is this call for a deeper, wider understanding of what is political and what isn't. And I think it's fascinating that it's come from women who perhaps are less interested in that point scoring at tax 1p, tax 2p, you're good, you're bad, and actually sitting down because their voices aren't usually listened to. So when they were listened to, there was a lot that they had been, holding on to and wanting to say and put into context and in an agenda that really isn't normally regarded as the right political agenda. So that was very interesting.
There was also some really interesting discussion around caring, so women in a caring role and how they're supported in that role.
Oh gosh, absolutely. The 9 to 5, the idea that if you're working, if you're economically active, and most of us work in offices, it's 9 to 5. That idea, that way of being a family is based on daddy going out to work 9 to 5, coming home, mummy's home, maybe she's got a nice 50s dress on and her hair done, lipstick on for dad. Now that both genders work, let's get real about this. If there's a sick child, someone needs to take a day off, and it's usually the woman. If there's ageing relatives in need of care, again, the burden falls disproportionately on women. So this is a completely artificial distinction between the work of caring that we need as a society to just, care for each other and look after each other, and the 9 to 5. And some of the people say, but it's daft. People should be able to change their hours. There should be flexibility, more options for home working. Not this, you go to the office at 9, you leave at 5, because if both mummy and daddy are doing that, who is there to look after that sick vein? And that's a political issue too. So what you're talking about is a real change to the way we think about paid work and how people do it, so that we can care for the ageing population and children. So,
but what should politicians do? What should the state do in relation to this agenda, in relation to this vitality? But I mean, there are two things I was just going to say. I mean, Ailsa Mackay is sort of credited, the late Ailsa Mackay, great feminist economist, is kind of credited with sitting down with Alex Salmond and saying, look, here's the numbers on childcare. It not only is good to do, but it pays for itself, gets women back into the labour market. There's obviously other aspects of childcare as well, which is exactly on that kind of two men and women being flexible and the care demands. But the next thing on the horizon, well, there's two things on the horizon. There's things like basic income. There's a lot of talk about basic income. But one of the arguments for basic income, not just redistribution from the tax avoiders, but it gives people a higher base from which to decide the kind of life, the kind of mix of work and care and recreation and self-development that they want. Now, we should be trying, that's my big challenge to the Scottish Government and coming forward, is that let's trial some of these ideas. Danish flex security, they don't have they call it social flex security, which means that they presume that people have freelance lives. We would call it 0 hours work, but when you stop work, you don't fall to the bottom and crash on the rocks. You have a level of support, but for 8 or 9 months, that it puts you at the level of a high proportion of the wage that you just lost. They presume that people live flexible lives, but they respond collectively.
That's
not as if there's not ideas out that could exactly respond to what you're talking about.
I suppose the ideas are there, but the question is, well, you get to how much can the Scottish Government do about benefits? We're about to get universal credit, which will have a dreadful impact on women because it's one payment per household, and women, if they have an alcoholic or a gambling or an abusive partner, it will actually take money away from women. So there's all these good ideas. You immediately get into, does the Scottish Parliament have enough powers? And what was really interesting and not surprising was that the ultimate conclusion of the Women for Independence was always, yes, but we need independence for the things we really want around social security, getting rid of Trident. It doesn't happen within the union. So there are these ideas around, but politicians, in fact, maybe we should broaden politicians. Politicians who are elected politicians have these very restricted boxes in which to work, and they are responding to and putting forward, I go back to this, a penny on the tax, a penny off the tax. Who cares? I mean, really, I don't believe that people vote because they want a penny more or a penny less in tax. It just seems such a bizarre way to frame the debate. So we would be good to bring in some of these greater ideas, these new ideas. But does the Scottish Parliament have the power, and can it step outside the political box, the ding-dangs, the partisanship? Can it step outside them to actually do something? And that is the really big challenge that we need to put to the Scottish Parliament. Can you stop doing politics the same way and see what you could do differently? And that's very difficult.
But I have to say, that's a direct challenge to the SNP, which is currently a fantastic, efficient, sleek, election-winning machine. I mean, that's, and not they're good governors as well. But how do you then, if you are the natural party of government for a period of time, surely there's a sort of mission, vision thing that comes in to say, well, what is the legacy we're going to leave behind? I mean, tuition fees will not disappear with the rocks melt with the sun. We know that, but it's bitty. There's lots of and one of the things that SNP ended up defending is stuff that previous parliaments already wanted to kind of make happen. There is no vision, there is no philosophy, there is no philosophical or theoretical ambition for what a SNP future, what their legacy is going to be for this, within any powers that they have. I totally agree with you about the fact that you measure it up against what the union allows and what nation statehood allows. But they have a big tick in the box from the Scottish people, and I think there has to be some imaginative thinking, despite what happens at the state level or the big constitutional level, about how you build a legacy with all this power.
I guess that's what this is about, really, to try and find that. But anyway, it's been a great discussion. Thank you very much for taking part in it.
We'll have some more after.
Will this report be out and available?
We're going to. It will be on our website from tomorrow morning.
Right, okay,
so
great.
Watch our social media feeds, watch Twitter, watch Facebook, and you'll see the links to the full thing.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Can we go? Shall we go?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next guest is Viv Gee, who is a Scottish comedian, and she's going to tell us what her take on the week's events. Viv.
A little bit of sit-down comedy today for you. It's nice to be in the full Scottish. I myself, I'm from the posh side of Glasgow, Edinburgh, and I just wanted to touch on independence because when originally all this talk about independence was happening, I didn't know who I was going to vote for, and then I realised that I could read, and when I woke up on the 19th of September 2014, I remember thinking it felt like I'd been adopted by my foster parents who couldn't stand me, but they couldn't stand the thought of anyone else making me happy. And that is how I felt. And I do feel, it would have been great for Scotland independence, because I feel that there's lots of things happening. Like, I feel like our NHS has been dismantled, and there's long waiting lists, and this was very apparent when I was in a doctor's surgery in Glasgow a couple of weeks ago, and there was two old ladies, and they actually had sleeping bags, sandwiches, flasks of tea. I don't know how long they'd been there. And one of them turned to me and says, "Do you want a cup of tea, doll?" I says, "Well, no thanks. But if I need to give a sample, I might get one later." And one turned to me and says, "No, I think you get your own cup for that, doll." Although the way things are happening, I think you'll probably have to bring your own cup in future. But and I was thinking about all the PPPs that have been happening, all these schools in Edinburgh that have been closed down. It's terrible to say, but I think I would have loved that if I was at school. Remember, you used to pray for snow, so you get snowed in, and now people are getting PPP'd in. Who'd have thought it? Oh, I hope that's a crack in the roof. We might get PPP'd in. That'd be great, yeah. I mean, when we were at school, the inspectors we had were knit nurses. Now, knit nurses, they could find a microscopic egg on a strand of hair. That's who you need in these schools, seeing if they're safe. And then they would tell everyone, they'd get it closed down, everyone would know who was responsible right away, ostracise them, and I think that would have been good. It really would. To me, PPPs, I don't know a lot about them, right? But how I read it is that it's like buying pre-grated street cheese. Saves you time, it looks really nice, you don't know what's in it, it won't last as long, and you're better off buying the whole cow. That's what... It also reminds me of, remember that rhyme you used to do at school, the house that Jack built? It's like the school that PPP built. This is the school that PPP built. This is the millions that we gave to the contractors to build the school that PPP built. This is the billions that pays for the millions that we give to the contractors to pay for this school that PPP built. This is the jobs that we need to pay for the taxes to pay for the billions to give to the millions for the PPP. The school that PPP built. This is the school that we go to get the jobs, to get the taxes, to pay for the billions. And actually, no, the school's just shut. That would just be it. You know, all this talk about tax as well. All these people that don't want to pay tax, people that are scared to pay more tax than they already don't. I mean, I think, you know, this thing about the Panama Papers, that would be a brilliant film. Could you imagine, like, the new Goonies, where this group of kids from some working class community on their skateboards, do you know what I mean? And they find the Panama Papers, and this is like, oh, this is to where all the buried treasure that the greedy people had is all hidden. Right, let's find it, and they find the treasure and they say, what happens now? Is it good conquers evil? And they go, well, no, it just goes to their families, and then they hold it for them. Right, is that what happens? Because David Cameron, you know, he actually, I mean, he gave his hairdresser an OBE. Think about all the amazing brave people in the world. I don't count hairdressers as brave. Do you know what I mean? Depends whose hair they're cutting. Maybe, you know, maybe if you're, I don't know, Kim Jong-il's hair or something. But if you, but I think, what did they get an OBE for? You know, their chat. In you come, Mr. Cameron. You know, in for more cuts. So you just do the same as. Should we do the same as usual? No, take it off the bottom and put as much as we can on top. So going anywhere nice this year? No, but my money is. Anyway, that's been me. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Viv. We've got to speak now.
Indeed.
Joining us now, we've got Tina Woolnough to talk to us about the effects of the PPP debacle in Edinburgh. Welcome, Tina.
Good afternoon, thank you.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
I understand your son attends one of the schools that's been affected by the closures. How has that impacted on you and families in a similar situation?
I think probably in our family it's been relatively easy because he's in 6th year, he's just finishing his time at school, but for many other families, particularly working families or people with primary age children or people with children with additional support needs, it's been really, really difficult.
This here, right here, this is a tie.
It is.
Where it's supposed to keep the school wall sort of together.
Yeah.
When did you first as a parent, become aware that there was something not quite right in some of the schools in Edinburgh?
I think when my children, I have 3 children, 2 have now left school, 1's still there. When my daughters first started at high school, I was on the then school board and then became the chair of what then became the parent council. We found that there were all sorts of issues with the building as a result of the PPP1, as it's called in Edinburgh, programme of schools. There were certain heating issues, there were...
This was how long ago, sorry?
This was in about 2006,
Fine.
so 3 or so years after the project. So looking back at the experiences then, we were making deputations to the local authority. It wasn't about structural issues, it was more about the building being habitable.
Yeah.
The old part was too hot because the PPP contract had made changes to that building as well, dropped the ceilings in the classrooms. So we became aware that actually it wasn't a place to learn comfortably in, and it wasn't a place for staff to work in. And we had an HMI inspection, and we used that as an opportunity because they noted the things that we raised as parents to go to the council and lobby for improvements to be made to the building. Those improvements came eventually after a lot of lobbying, but they cost a fortune because when it's a PPP facilities management contract, you're paying over the odds, which is hence the profit that's been talked about on your programme already. So in terms of the actual structure of the building, we had a gym wall that bulged about 4
What, when
years
the balls
ago.
hit it?
Well, over time, pupils, staff noticed that it was developing a bulge. That was reported to us at the Parent Council, and we thought, oh, that sounds bad. They said they were shut in a gym hall, it was going to be fixed. The advantage of hindsight, you think that was the same. That was the same problem, without a doubt. I don't know then. People knew that there weren't wall ties in that wall, I'm sure. I don't think anybody investigated any further, and it's obviously taken the issue at the primary school after the storms to show actually what is not behind the brick walls, behind the facades.
The people you know who are parents and who have kids at different schools in Edinburgh or whatever, I mean, what are the main difficulties that they're facing now? Is it, I know there's some issues possibly about kids not being fed because they're not having school meals, so therefore there's a growing use of food banks. Is that something that you're seeing?
I'm aware of that. What's happening is that children are no longer getting the hot meal that is obviously delivered free to the first few years of primary school now as part of the Scottish Government initiative. So certainly in our school, it's sandwiches being delivered into what was the old school hall. So there's no canteen facilities available. Children are being encouraged to go out down to the village, which has kind of environmental consequences with rubbish and so forth. Also cost, I think. But they're offering free sandwiches in our school and free small bottle of water. Primary school children who are dependent on the hot meal during the day, obviously they aren't able to get that. I don't know what provision exactly, it'll vary across the board, but certainly the days that children were off school, and some of them aren't going back till next week, children have not had the meal. There's been a serious cost or disadvantage to parents who aren't able to access food.
I also read somewhere this morning that some parents who aren't happy to send their children across the city to another school could face fines for not sending their children to school.
It leaves me speechless. Actually,
Yeah.
this whole thing has left me speechless because, I don't have a hugely high, opinion of local authority. There's been issues about building works in Edinburgh, a whole range of them for a number of years, actually.
You wrote about some of them, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've written about PPP about 10 years ago because my children had just started at the high school that they go to, and I realised how constraining the whole system was, that you could fundraise as a parent council or a parent staff association, but you couldn't do anything to the building, so you could never make improvements because of the constraints of the contract. So I looked into PPP.
Sorry, just for people who may not understand, people like me, who may not understand what difference a PPP makes to not the funding of it, but the actual running of a school building.
Okay.
How does that affect the pupils, I guess? How does it affect pupils?
Well, in terms of pupils and staff, actually, and
Right.
parental involvement and community involvement, there are a whole set of rules, which, with the PPP1 contract, they were very restrictive. There were certain things that could be done and couldn't be done.
Okay.
In terms of the day-to-day running the school, it's a facilities management company, it's Amy in this case, who run the janitorial service, they run the meals, they also run building maintenance. And they are, if you like, overseeing that the rules within the contract are stuck to. So that meant, for the first 13 years of the contract or so, prohibitively high charges for booking the school. So our school wasn't booked out on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday. None of the playing fields, none of the facilities were available
Because
it's
you
too
were charged.
expensive.
You were charged
Too
for
much.
that. Okay.
Prohibitively high charges, that's right.
Okay.
Commercial charges.
Right.
So that excluded a whole raft of activities that
Although
used to go on.
I'm not
for-
sure that applies with the current way we fund schools, but it certainly did then, and I think there was an overall unhappiness with that.
That's right. They changed it in Edinburgh about a year and a half ago. They managed to somehow, I don't know how, and I don't know what the pros and cons were, renegotiate the PPP1 contract. So they reduced those charges. But I have to say, I now have concerns about, what was the compensation.
Right.
You change contracts, it's a benefit in one way, and there's going to be a, counter.
Yeah, you have to pay to
benefit.
get out of it.
Well, what was the deal
Yeah,
that was done
yeah.
about that? So.
Okay. So what do you think has to happen now?
In terms of the current situation.
In terms of the current situation, specifically the current situation, but also in terms of, I suppose, giving parents elsewhere in the country comfort, and these problems arise elsewhere, not just in Edinburgh?
I think the difficulty with this particular contract, and indeed with other PPP or PFI contracts is the building is owned by the partnership or the management company that runs it. It's no longer owned by the local authority. So you've got a local authority operating services, or indeed a public body operating health or education in a building that's not owned by them.
Yeah.
And the notion that you can separate provision of a building and the maintenance of the building from what goes on within it seems to me something that is not, it's not a winnable position to have. So schools need to be responsive to the needs of staff and the needs of children. And if you can't, because you've got rules governing what you can and can't do, then what kind of educational experience is that? And when I wrote 10 years ago, that really was the nub of it for me, is you've got this whole set of circumstances which is not about children. It's not about the staff that work within the school. It's not about education. It's about managing a building, supposedly to save money at the time, but as we've discussed this morning, a high cost long term. And the ethos is affected within a school. If you can't do anything, you can't take part in making improvements, you don't feel that it belongs, or you belong to it and it belongs to you.
So for you, the problems of PPP extend beyond just safety problems, although clearly that's the thing that's exercising minds currently, but there is a fundamental kind of mismatch in the relationship.
Correct. There's a problem essentially between the relationship between public and private and the expectations between those things. Looking at the business case, the draft business case for this PPP1 contract, it was quite clear that it was all about money. It was all about management of risk, it was all about money, and it was all about getting the job done as quickly as possible. So all the things have been mentioned.
What about the checking?
The checking is throughout this last couple of weeks, I've been unable to understand how this happened, and I think I do now, having read this draft business case on the Scottish Government website. I understand how it happened, and how it happened was that all the risk on the building, being fit for purpose, safe, all these things, was entirely transferred to the PPP private partnership arrangements. So there was an assumption that they would look after that and the safety of the building and the integrity of the building, because it was in their interest to, because if it went wrong, they were going to have to pay for it.
Okay.
That assumption, I think, is a fundamental problem.
In that, it's an assumption that has proved to be incorrect?
Absolutely. The assumption was that the private sector would look after itself, if you like, that in the running of the schools into the future, the buildings I'm talking about, that they would have built them right in order to minimise maintenance costs. And here we find ourselves, they couldn't be trusted, even in a commercial footing, to sort that out.
So just briefly to finish and wrap up, how do you fix it? How do you resolve the situation that we're in currently?
In terms of the actual the buildings fixing, I really don't know. Richard was showing the wall ties. These are tiny little objects that have to be inserted every couple of feet throughout every building structure in every wall. I don't know how, technically I'm obviously not an expert, if it can be fixed. I think it will take a long time. I think children are being displaced across the city, and it's going to be for months and months. And I really have a problem with the kind of PR agenda, the spin that's being put on how this is being presented, that children are back in class as of next week. They're not in their own classes, they're not with their own heads and their own situations. I don't think anything could be done any differently, but actually let's not minimise the impact of this on children, staff or families.
Tina, thank you very much for that insight into that problem. I'm sure, like some of the issues we've talked about today, this is something that's not going to go away anytime soon. No. You shall hear more about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's us now. We're at the final part of the show.
Indeed,
it's gone really quickly.
It has been very quickly, yes.
We would like to invite Megan back on to the stage. Thank you, Megan.
So Megan, just before you give us another song, tell us a little bit about yourself. I believe you have some music coming out relatively soon.
Yeah, well, it's just it's in the works right now. At some point this year, there's going to be a release, but you can just look at my Facebook and hopefully I'll have a date soon.
Okay.
And where could we see you? Where are you going to be playing that we could come and watch?
I've got a gig this month on the 28th in the Record Factory, and then I'm going to. That is in the West End, so by
West End of Glasgow?
Yeah. And then I'm playing Eden Festival this year in June.
Festival's in Dumfries?
Yeah.
Indeed.
That's right.
Small scale festival, but definitely an interesting one.
Yeah.
You've been before?
Yeah, I was there last year. It was amazing.
Good. Well, thank you very much. We're going to have one more song just before you do that, just to say I hope you really enjoyed the show this week. Hopefully you'll tune in again next week. I mean, hopefully we will be a little bit more punctual.
So I'd like to thank all of our guests today, Elaine and Lynn, David, Pat, Kathleen, Robert, Megan, Viv. Thank you very much.
And just finally, you can tweet to give us some feedback on the show, which would be very helpful to us. You can tweet using the hashtag FullScottish. You can also tweet during the show, and hopefully we'll work out a way of reacting to those tweets while we're on air for next week. But in the meantime, goodbye, and we'll hand you over to Megan. And this song is called
Mother's Arms.